Five, four, three, two, one. Want to say welcome to Professor Akil Parker from All This Math back here. I Never Knew TV. Fire, what's going on?
What's going on?
Serious thing. Glad to have you here. I once heard you say it's not a good flex because you always talking about how we flexing on something, right? It's not a good flex having others have full responsibility for your child's education. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, education is such an important aspect of our children's growth and development. And, it's also part of their socialization process. So you don't want to give especially not the entire activity, to anybody else. You at least want to, if you're not going to be the primary educator and have somebody else supplement what you're doing, you at least want to be involved. And a lot of times, like a lot of things in our community, we often, we don't want to take ownership of responsibilities. We've been conditioned in many ways to say, well, if I can get somebody else to do it, then I'm winning. But what we don't realize is by, basically, acquiescing and giving up that responsibility to somebody else, you never learn how to do the thing. So then when it comes time to do the thing, you don't know how to do the thing. So we don't understand the math because we said, well, I can just send my kids to school and let the math teacher teach them everything, right? And if we really understand Western education, we got to understand that these schools don't have the capacity to really help your child to be fully proficient anyway. A lot of times when children are fully proficient, it's because they have some type of, other supplemental support, or they have like a solid foundation that came from the home, the community, or from somewhere else, right? So we can't just keep like giving up responsibilities. And I think we got to start like reorienting ourselves to consider that responsibilities are something that we should want to keep, we should want to hold on to, the same way we want to hold on to money, hold on to our resources, hold on to our property, our land, you know what I mean? All these types of things. We got to stop thinking that, if I don't know how to do something, like it's as if it's an act of, participating in some type of luxury. If I can just like send my kids, I send my kids to the school, let them teach them. Because we see what the results of that is. We see that all the time.
And do you think there are two things I'm gonna ask on behalf of people watching? I know they're gonna bring this up, right? First thing, do you think that we just don't value education collectively? I know there are like different subcultures within Black culture, but collectively, do you think we don't value education at the level we should, and that's the result? These behaviors is a result of that.
So I definitely think we've been conditioned to not value it enough. I will say that overall we do value it, but I don't think we value it enough, and I don't think we value it for the proper reason. A large part of the issue too is that we often see education as something purely transactional. It's like I'm only going to school so that I can get a job, right? It's never like, oftentimes it's never like, well, I'm going to school so I can learn subjects, so I can understand the world better, so I can understand how like we should take biology so you can understand like how your body works, right? We should understand chemistry so we can understand how like different, agents and elements react with each other that we deal with on a daily basis, right? We should understand math so we can learn how to problem solve and develop our critical thinking ability. But a lot of times, like we end up valuing education less because we're like, well, that ain't gonna get me a job or get me some money right now, then I'm cool. I don't care about that, right? But also we've been conditioned to not really value education. So it's like it's a systemic thing, right? It's not just individuals waking up in the morning saying, you know what, I don't care about school, I don't care about education. The society that we live in often like promotes this like anti-intellectualism, where it's like just focus on this and don't focus on that, right? So I think all of that like plays a part.
And what would you say to parents who say, "Hey, man, I'm just busy, bro. I'm here, I'm working, I'm trying to provide." Because I remember when I was teaching, I had a parent tell me straight. I wasn't even calling for any behavior. It was with work. That man said he don't care. It's not his responsibility. It's your responsibility. And hung up the phone.
Well, that's back to the other question. Like, we gotta start thinking about this. Like, why would you not want your child's education to be a responsibility? I think a lot of people never like sat down and really explicitly thought about that question. I think we're just conditioned naturally to just go with the flow and be like, look, and buy into this idea, this notion that like my responsibility is just to get my kids to school on time, make sure they got their uniforms, hopefully they behave properly, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? So like between the hours of like 8 a.m. and like 3 p.m., like, the child is not my responsibility, right? And then it's like this whole in loco parentis thing kicks in. And then, the schools want to have responsibility, but then schools also talk about parental involvement. So it's like we got to figure out like that balance, you know? But yeah, to the parents that say they busy, I mean, everybody busy. It's an issue of prioritization. That's what adults do as an adult. I mean, even as a child or a teenager, you got to prioritize because we got 24 hours in a day. We got a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things we want to do, a lot of things we need to do. We got to decide what's most important. So I think even to the busy person, because even that person, that parent that says I'm busy, they're still doing some things, right? And the things that they end up doing are the things that they think are important. But what I believe is that we've been conditioned to think that to not think as highly of education and the educational process that we don't prioritize it high enough, whereas we want to get personally involved in it enough. And that's got to change if we want our outcomes to change.
In the previous conversation, you spoke about the calculus conspiracy, right? You were saying, I paraphrase, I think we should be introducing calculus much earlier than the 12th grade. I never took calculus, and I graduated college, so I'm just going to put that out there. And I graduated from a good school, too. So I think, all right, so I'm paraphrasing. You said, I think we should be introducing calculus much earlier than the 12th grade when most get it, if they get it at all. It just shows that the goal is not really for us to get to calculus, and calculus is the gatekeeper to higher graduate level math. Why do you think everyone's not being exposed to calculus?
Well, I mean, it helps to maintain the status quo because, like I said, like calculus is really that gateway to higher level graduate math. Like, so because after Calc 1, then it's Calc 2, then it's Calc 3, differential equations, and a whole host of other classes. And a lot of people that have opinions about calculus and about math have never taken calculus. They just know it's like the way it's marketed to us. It's this really hard class for really smart people. And if you never sat in a calculus class, like you might be intimidated by it. But there's a lot of algebra in it. So, I think that it should be introduced earlier, and we could introduce it a lot earlier because a lot of the concepts, when we introduce calculus concepts, we revert and refer back to geometry concepts, algebra 1 concepts like the slope of a line. Everybody always talk about, I'm never going to use y equals mx plus b. Well, the slope of a straight line is relevant to the slope of the tangent line to a curve that we deal with in calculus 1, right? So I'm like, if you a child and you can understand the slope of a line, then you can understand that same slope, in a calculus scenario. Now, of course, you still need a lot more prerequisites to get a full understanding of the whole range of all calculus topics. But some things can be introduced at an early age, And I think about the ancestor, the late Bob Moses, who was a co-author of Radical Equations, him and Charles Cobb. They was in SNCC together back in the 60s and whatnot. And in his book, he said that, well, in his work, because he's the architect behind the Algebra Project and the work that they've been doing. And, he said his goal for his organization was he wanted to prepare students to be calculus ready by the end of 12th grade. And I'm saying, like, I like that, but I'm saying, like, let's leverage that and go beyond and even start like offering calculus like at the middle school level and whatnot. And just kind of just see what happens. Because that's how you really like, get into STEM anyway. Yeah. You get people to like major in math, and then because when you get that deep into the math, whether you're doing applied math or pure math, you start to see the beauty of math. And a lot of people that walk around talking about I hate math, or they kind of shudder and get all nervous when somebody even start talking about math or whatever. Like they never get to the point where you start to see the beauty in it, and you start to see like the fun in it, and like the just the different aspects, and you start to see like how this can help you in everyday life.
And for those unaware, could you give an example how calculus applies to everyday life?
It's about like the rate of change, like measuring the rate of change, speed of a car, right? So, calculus can basically be broken down into two general parts, right? So you got the rate of change, right? When you're dealing with like velocity, like your car sitting still, right? When you hit the gas, it starts moving, right? So the location of the car, the position of the car is changing, right? But then if you're not going a consistent speed, like let's say, because if you're driving in the streets, you're not going 40 miles per hour the whole time because you got to stop at stop signs, you got to stop at red lights. If you're on the highway, you might accelerate, you get in the fast lane, get out the fast lane, whatever, right? So you're going at different speeds at different times. So then acceleration comes into play. So calculus is a way to, measure that as well. Then we got optimization problems, right? So let's say you got a certain amount of money and you got to do a certain amount of things with the money. We can use calculus to figure out, okay, like what's the maximum I could get with this amount of money, right? That's optimization. Then another part of calculus, we deal with integrals and we deal with like area, but the area of like weird type looking shapes. Because everything ain't just like a nice, neat square, rectangle, triangle, trapezoid, or whatever. We got, straight up formulas for that. But what if it's like something weird, like part of it look like a circle, then part of it look like a trapezoid, then part of it look like a straight line, So calculus can like answer those questions, you know. And it does get complex, but again, back to, what I always say, math is really about problem solving. It's about helping to develop us to be able to solve problems, right? So the more complex the math is that we're doing, we're preparing ourselves to solve more complex problems in our everyday lives outside of a classroom, just walking down the street or just dealing with and interacting with other human beings, you know?
What would be an example of the beauty of math?
The beauty of math, like, one of the things that I think about when I think of the beauty of math is like the fact that you can like solve a problem in multiple different ways and you get the same exact answer. And you start to see like the relationships and how things are equivalent. Like, using the distributive property versus using a traditional algorithm that you might have learned, or, just different ways. Like, it's just, to me, it's just a beautiful thing because it shows how everything's interconnected, and then even like with geometry, right? There's a sister, another ancestor from out of Baltimore, Dr. Gloria Gilmer. She did a lot of work with ethnomathematics, which is basically, ethnomathematics just basically means how is math used within different cultures. So she did a lot of work studying like in the African and African American culture, like how we use math or how math represents itself and presents itself, right? So she was very interested in like, braids and cornrows and the different tessellations, because like that's another issue of beauty, right? So like when you see a sister, she got her braids freshly done, not some knotless braids or some cornrows or something, and everything is like laid and it's like, and it's attractive to us, right? We're attracted to the geometry and the patterns and the balance and the symmetry and how everything, it's nice and neat and put together. That's what we're really attracted to. We don't know it. Part of the reason we don't know that, we don't think that's because all our lives we've been told math is irrelevant and don't have nothing to do with our daily experience. But what we really like is that symmetry and like how everything is like
Calculation of the
is
design,
patterned,
yeah.
right? The tessellations, the parts, the little squares or the trapezoids or the rectangles or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So like that's another manifestation of like the beauty of mathematics that we don't really talk about because we don't. A lot of times in the geometry class, the geometry teacher, myself included, I was guilty of this early in my career. I wasn't having that conversation with my students in geometry. And when I was early in my career, I'm straight like, just trying to get them to memorize the theories, memorize the formulas. And that's not the most effective way to teach because I was keeping it abstract. I wasn't bringing it into daily life. And like, how is this relevant to your daily life? You know?
And you brought up another great point. I was listening to you, right? Do you think that's one of the biggest issues with math and students is the fact that the teachers that are teaching the math aren't really well versed in math?
I definitely do. A lot of math teachers don't know math for real. They don't know it. When I say that, I say that for different reasons. One reason is a lot of us back in the day that ended up becoming teachers, we were taught in math in terms of algorithms, meaning just memorize this formula, memorize this process, and just use it and get to the answer. Kind of like when we was young playing video games. Just try to get to the next, beat the level, go to the next level, beat that level. But we never thought about, or we never were taught about the concepts behind why the algorithm even works. So when a lot of parents complain about the so-called new math, they're not realizing that this is meant to explain the concept behind the algorithm. Because a lot of times when you end up taking a standardized test or you just want to like figure something out, especially when you get to the higher level math, like we was talking about calculus. Calculus is very conceptual. A lot of times it's not just a straightforward algorithm or formula that you can use to solve a problem. Sometimes you got to like piece things together and put two and two together and figure out like, okay, well, if this does this and that does that, how can I combine and have some type of synthesis and then figure this out? But that takes a conceptual understanding. So a lot of teachers, they don't have that conceptual understanding. They don't have a conceptual background, and they know how to teach it the way they was taught, right? And a lot of times they was taught how to do something one way. So then they try to teach the child one way. And it's like I told my students at Cheney, like, you need to know how to do these problems in multiple ways because you might have a student in your class eventually, whether it's first grade, second, third, fourth, whatever, right? That doesn't understand how to do it this way that you're very well versed at teaching it, right? So you gotta know how to teach them another way because when you teach them another way, then they might understand it. And not only that, another benefit is then they might then be able to make the original method you tried to teach make more sense. So then it's like a 2-for-1. So now they end up knowing two different ways of doing a problem, which is just a great situation to be in because you don't want to be like locked into just like one form of problem
But
solving.
it's just life in general, fire. You gotta know how to do things many different ways, you know?
Yeah, because you can't just be like, if I only know how to get home one way and we driving
You in problems.
and then the streets is blocked off, what I'm gonna do? Just sit there in my car and be mad, just sleep in my car that night? No, you gotta figure something out. You gotta figure out another route to take.
For those unaware, STEM means science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? In 2018, black students made up only 8.4% of bachelor degrees and 5.5% of doctoral degrees in STEM. In 2021, black people made up 9% of the STEM workforce. Seems very easy for certain racial groups to dominate STEM fields because black children disqualify themselves from competition for those opportunities by believing that math is too hard, right? Um, I call it typecasting, right? I think we have a real serious issue with typecasting ourselves to play a role and not believing we are able to play another role. I typecasted myself early on in life. I can attest to that. I told myself I was unable to do something, right? Let's talk about STEM, right? Why do you think the numbers are so low in STEM?
Well, I think that the reason that the numbers are so low is because a lot of us get programmed and we buy into the programming that math is too difficult. And oftentimes at a young age, we're convinced that math is too difficult, math is irrelevant, you'll never be able to get it, and it's not going to help you in your life, right? And also even the term STEM, right? The acronym STEM, I actually have issues with that because by mathematics being the M in STEM, it kind of gives this kind of impression that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are on the same level. But in fact, the mathematics is really the gateway to the science, the technology, and the engineering. So, you really need the math first. You need the science, technology, and engineering because we don't want to make the other mistake of not providing the applications to the children because
Right.
children need to understand, okay, well, yeah, okay, I know how to solve equations now, but when am I going to use this? Yeah, I understand proportions and decimals and fractions, but when am I going to use this? So that's where the science comes into play, the technology comes into play, the engineering, all those things. Even art, some people say STEAM. Even in art, like you're using mathematics in art, whether you're making music, you got to count bars and whatnot, or notes and whatnot in terms of fractions, all these types of things. Drawing, with paintings and things of that nature. The geometry and the symmetry of and all that and whatnot. But I definitely think that the reason is because and also it helps to maintain the status quo as well. Of okay, certain people will have access to those opportunities, and other people won't.
Yeah, it's a problem we have in many industries where the system creates a mind frame in certain people that minimizes competition. And I have to acknowledge parents too, but I can't blame them because they've been programmed more, as you said. But parents play a big role in discouraging children from pursuing certain things because they feel themselves they're unable to do it and they project that on the child.
That definitely happens. Happens all the time. You know, and I think and parents, I think a lot of times do it unwittingly. They don't even realize it. Maybe it's like a fear that they have. And I guess maybe it comes from a space of love where it's like, I feel like I'm trying to protect you from.
I think it's love. I think they think they're saving you from embarrassment and hurt,
Yeah.
but it's a distorted thing. Because I know personally, I have witnessed with my eyes, personally, in retrospect now, a lot of parents that discourage their children from reaching a certain heights because whether the fear of embarrassment or fear of failing or
Yeah.
whatever's going on, they didn't provide that child with any support and they actually discouraged the child from doing that thing.
And that child probably would have been able to excel in that
They
thing.
definitely would have been able to, you know what I'm saying? So, parents listening, please stop projecting your fears on your children.
Yeah. And that brings us to another point. The fact that, like, oftentimes in terms of education, the focus is solely on the children. But we really need to provide like a more holistic approach because a lot of the parents that are adults, they once upon a time were children that, didn't get certain types of education.
Traumatized, fighting.
That
Traumatized
traumatized.
with
Yeah. Like,
education.
so it's never too late. So it's like even the parents got to be able to like kind of get over that fear and that trauma that they have so that they can be more of a resource for their own children and so that they don't unwittingly discourage their children. Because a lot of parents are out here discouraging their children and they may mean well, but it's like, yo, like, I was traumatized by this thing. So naturally, I want to protect you from this thing that traumatized me. And for some of us, it's math. But they know, okay, but my kids go to school and they got to take the math class, so they got to figure out, okay, well, how do I navigate this? You know, and I think one of the best ways is like for parents, no matter how old you are, even grandparents, uncles and aunties, like you got to learn the math. Like it's never too late. Like go learn the math. Like do whatever you got to do. Figure it out. You know, you try to find some resources that are available to help you get
All
over that.
this math. Make sure
All
you
this
tap into
math.
all this math.
Yeah, the YouTube channel. Yeah, that's what I made it for. That's what it's here for.
What advice would you give to parents in regards to getting your child into STEM programs earlier on and give them that exposure earlier on?
Look for them. Definitely look for them, like aggressively and proactively. Look for STEM programs. Make sure they legit. You know, not just some janky program where somebody just got some grant money and just what I'm saying, basically hustling or whatever. But also make sure that they're getting like mathematics preparation as early and often as possible. You know, because it's a shame, and this is one of my issues that I wonder about in terms of a lot of the proliferation of STEM programs, especially in the hood, right? Hoods all over the country. It seems like with some of these STEM programs, they're like a replacement for mathematics, which is a problem because it's like, yeah, it's great to deal with the application of mathematics. It's great to be in the engineering program and to build bridges with popsicle sticks and straws and all these types of things. Maybe make the little model robots and remote control cars. It's great to do the science laboratory experiments. That's great. That's excellent. However, at the same time, you should be able to solve equations. You should understand how to utilize y equals mx plus b, quadratic formula, so-called Pythagorean theorem. You should be able to do those things as well, as opposed to, because just a lot of people want to focus on and say, well, the kids don't like math. They scared of math,
Programming a car so it could run across the board. That's the STEM things I've been exposed to. Take the truth.
which is cool, but I think that should be supplemented by the actual algebra and the geometry that supports all of that actual those applications. Whereas a lot of times it's like, well, let's they don't like the math, so let's like instead let them do some fun stuff. And that's something else I got an issue with too. Is like it's always like, well, you got to make it fun. Like life ain't always fun. Sometimes we gotta just buckle down and sit down and like get work done. And we got to be able to have a certain amount of attention span and accomplish a goal without without having fun. It ain't always time for fun, right? So I just hope that a lot of these STEM programs are not used as a kind of like a distraction, because the long-term consequence of that is this. You have a child that did all the STEM programs. They want to be an engineer. I want to be a mechanical engineer. I want to be a computer engineer. I want to be a scientist. But then it's like, oh, but you got to take all these math classes in order to do that. But then if they were never developed mathematically, then it's like you could love science, technology, engineering all you want. You still ain't gonna qualify because you can't do the math, and you might still be scared of math. So we got to just figure out a way, like with these STEM programs. Yes, the application is important, but it's got to be supplemented by the application of mathematics skills, like real deal, like mathematics skills. Like, here, take this piece of paper, sit down, solve this system of equations using the elimination method, using the substitution method, using the graphing method, or whatever. Like that stuff that don't nobody like because they think it's boring because they didn't get to the point where they see the beauty of math yet.
I had a conversation with a legendary coach out of Virginia, right? And he's a football coach, and I was asking him. I said, "Hey, what's up with the today's kids?" And he said, "Nothing's wrong with today's kids." Fight. He said the parents have changed. So I called my old head coach Brandon, who used to coach me earlier, asked him the same question, and he agreed also. He said, "Nothing's wrong with today's kids." He said, "Kids are still the same. It's the parents that have changed." What are your thoughts on that?
I think the parents, I think parents are up against some different things, some different adversaries, like social media. There's more technology, so
Access.
yeah, more access. So, but it's like just in life, like when things get rough, we gotta get rougher, and a lot of parents haven't been able to keep up. So we got to figure out ways to like empower parents to be able to keep up, with all this technology, all the social media, and just the world has changed, and a lot of people, like when people blame children, I agree with the coach. I think children, we're fundamentally the same. The children are fundamentally the same, but the environment has changed a lot, because of the things I already named. But
People's approach to parenting has changed a lot. I feel that this is a theory. Nobody quote me on this, right? This is a theory I have. I don't know if I'm sharing this publicly, but I feel that like my parents didn't have access to credit like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because they didn't have access to credit, it was like payment plan and all that. But that's different. You got to actually bring the cash there every week to pay off for
Yeah.
something you don't get it. That limited the consumption,
Right.
right? And they couldn't default with this parenting to say I'll buy you or I'll demonstrate my love through purchasing because that wasn't an option. Now, what I'm noticing is that the definition of parenting for most people is providing material things.
Mm.
And I think what's happening too, especially with females, because they're working more, they feel something inside in regards to their parenting and the time they spend with the child. And to compensate, they buy in more stuff.
Mm.
And the result is no relationship and creating little consumers, creating little consumer monsters. That's what I've just been really observing, over the years.
I mean, that sounds like a symptom of monopoly capitalism.
Yeah, and it seems
Definitely.
like the parents, and I'm not saying because you spend time with your children, they're going to turn out great, right?
Right.
But especially the younger ones, it seems that their behavior is much more better than the parents who don't consistently spend time with them.
That time is key, because when you spend the time, it's like you get attention from your parents, and you get to have conversations, and you get to learn things from them.
You have that respect for your parents.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like you looking for and I think back to social media. A lot of times people end up looking for attention and love on social media because they're not getting it in real life. They're not getting it in their house.
Foolishness, yeah, facts.
Yeah, so that could happen too. Like because you can get dopamine from getting likes on social media, but you could also get dopamine from being liked by your people. Your people that you actually can sit down with and community with. But again, like that's a systemic issue because that's all of that has been forced on us. So but again, as parents, we gotta recognize what's going on around us. We gotta recognize this, and we gotta then start to think about, well, what can I do to address this problem? Right? Instead of just kind of going with the flow and just not even recognize. I think a lot of people don't recognize it as a problem. They just see it as, well, this is just how the world is. And like to your point, I can just, buy my children some things, But I mean, I understand like it's a complicated issue because people do got to go to work,
There's another side too. There's two parts I want to add to it, right? We have a large portion of the population who they don't make anything, right? They just working and it is what it is. Mm-hmm. This is not for them. This is for those who have a little cushion.
Right.
But they're addicted to this level of living that's taken away from other aspects of their life. And that's the decision people don't want to make. They don't want to reduce the lifestyle they're pursuing and focus on things that would be beneficial to the collective family long term.
Right. I see what you're saying. So you're saying like the people that are like the 6-figure earners, but
not even 6-figure fire, but somewhere where you could get through.
They're comfortable.
Yeah,
they're comfortable,
right?
But they might be working 100 hours a week though.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that's where this conversation is not for those who hand them out. This is not for them. The other ones though, what I've been noticing is that they're pursuing this lifestyle that's killing them and killing their family. Yeah. They don't realize it. And I think that's the issue we're running into, the lifestyle crisis, like trying to maintain this lifestyle that's not sustainable and unhealthy. And it's damaging to all parties who are involved.
Yeah, I think that's a very important word, sustainability. We often don't think about that. Can
you sustain making $250 a year? Can you put the energy in every year? Can you sustain the effort you got to put to make $300 a year? Is it sustainable?
Yeah.
And what's your health like? What's your mental health like? What's your physical health like? What's your spiritual health like? These are the questions we need to start asking.
Yeah, and because I was gonna say, are you considering those things? Because a lot of people just
on the job, give me this and that. And
we just grind right now.
It's gonna be grinded, Yeah,
it's like what's that old like J line? F tomorrow, as long as the night before was sweet. Like a lot of us just be like, we live in the moment, and we're not thinking long term about the the impact of a lot of our decisions and whatnot. Especially when you find yourself in a position where you just out just hustling and just trying to, get to the next dollar and get to the next level. And then, you may not think, again, it's like a math problem. Time horizon. It's like a graph. Like the x-axis is time, right? So you might only look at like a short period of time, like today, but you're not looking at it like stretched out the x-axis like 5 years. But if you look at something in the term in terms of 5 year a 5 year window, then you might start to see like why this is unsustainable. Like it's no way you can maintain this for 5 years straight. But that's why a lot of times like your body will check you. Your
Check you
your
right in the
body
hospital.
your body will force you to shut down.
All right, we spoke about the difficulties of or the low numbers, I should say, of the amount of black people who are in STEM programs, whether it's education or the workforce, right?
Mhm.
But we need to talk about also on the flip side the low numbers of Asians, Arabs, and whites who are in certain uh, NFL positions or NBA, not management, but actually on the field. Um, all right, there's a common denominator in regards to the low number of black people in STEM fields and the low number of Asians and Arabs in professional sports. I don't think it's biological fire. I think it's
Right.
just cultural, right? So, how much how much of a role does culture play in the occupations people pursue?
I think what culture can do is culture can dictate what activities and what careers we value more. Like, what do we support? Like, what are we going to promote? What have we seen historically our people doing? You know, um, and historically, maybe like a lot of the people in those ethnic groups or racial groups have not participated in that. But also, there's a crowding factor because if you think about like the NFL and NBA, if there's so many black people that grow up believing that I should and could be a football player, I should and could be a basketball player, then and you got all these AAU teams, you got the high school teams, you got the middle school level teams, everybody crowds into those positions.
You gotta produce something.
Yeah. So it's gonna be dominated by a certain group of people. So oftentimes it's us, right? Because we believe that we're supposed to be doing that. We don't believe that we supposed to get PhDs in mathematics. We don't believe that because oftentimes we don't see black people with PhDs in mathematics.
And if you do, you don't get no attention either. That's the next factor we have to acknowledge: attention.
Yeah,
What do you get attention? Fine, I know dudes that hoop just for attention. They may have been D1, like they don't love basketball, bro. It's just what it brought. It brought attention.
yeah.
Let's just call it what it is, right?
And that's the thing we got to change. So that's the thing we got to like, so you see that like the young brother, the young sister, like they, get A's in math all the
You gotta
time.
boost them up, man.
Yeah, you gotta boost them up. You gotta hype them up just as much as we hype up the kids that play football and play basketball and all this and that. Because the thing is also too, and this is something that Jawanza Kundrufu talked about in his book To Be Popular or Smart. Oftentimes there's this dichotomy that gets created where it's like, if I want to be cool, then I can't be good at math, right? But there are spaces where like, nah, the kids that are quote unquote cool, they also excel in math, right? And I think we gotta like promote them and then promote them more and also have more young brothers and young sisters see that like you don't have to make that choice. It don't have to be either or, it could be both and, you know?
And I want to say to all the parents, uncles, coaches out there, don't depend on the school to hype up these kids, because depending on what school they're in, the knucklehead's gonna get majority of attention, and they get them the majority of the time, and the kids excelling kind of get ignored. So you have to really take the responsibility of really hyping up these kids, and we do it in our own circle. I see more people doing it, but you have to almost have like events and parties for kids excelling. It can't just be like, oh, you made honor roll and that's it. Like you really got to like hype it up.
Yeah, because we got another thing too, and like parents do this too. We kind of a lot of us operate on this assumption of this idea that well, if you get good grades, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do anyway. So like, why I'm gonna celebrate that? Like but we should celebrate it because while yes, the expectation may be that they get good grades, when we think about things, if you zoom out and we think about the larger context of our community, how many of us are not excelling academically. So then now it's like, okay, well, really it becomes an issue of marketing. It's a marketing tactic to show like, all right, well, maybe if more of us saw that it is a positive to excel academically, then maybe I would want to do that too. But like you said, like the kids that get the attention, they be the knuckleheads. Knuckleheads get the attention.
24/7.
So a lot of times, and we take it back to mathematics, statistics, the bell curve. I remember thinking about this like in the class when I was in the classroom, right? Most kids is in the middle. Most kids could go either way, right? You got some kids that are like they're gonna be on point. They're gonna be respectful. They're gonna be solid students no matter what. They at one end of the bell curve. Then the other end of the bell curve, you got the kids that's like, listen, I'm dedicated to being a jerk. I'm gonna just be a jerk no matter what. You know what I mean? Like, but in a way, you got to respect both of them because it's like at least you take a stand, right? But the majority of the students in the room, they in the middle. They in the middle of the bell curve, right? They could go either way. And then as a teacher, what you got to realize is like, okay, so I'm trying to get them to get the majority of the kids in the middle to go this way. I want them to follow the lead of the solid student. I don't want because once they start following the lead of the kid that's dedicated to being a jerk, then like that throws everything off, right? Because that kid or those kids that are dedicated to being jerks, you probably can't get rid of them, you know. So hopefully, maybe their dedication is not that cemented in. Maybe you can like converse with them and try to get them to like sway them to go to the other side. But a lot of them in a math classroom is usually a deficiency. They got a deficiency in math.
Cover that up.
So they're like, yo, all right, I'm not good at math, but I'm good at clowning people though. Right. So watch this. This math class is about to be my stand up every day. But you gotta have that conversation as the teacher. You gotta have that conversation and let them know like, nah, that I don't know what you think this is, but this ain't that, right? You can't do that. This can't be your comedy show, right? Because I'm trying to teach, right? But we gotta start hyping up the kids that are like determined to be solid students and like promote them and give them more attention.
I think like collectively we that's a big aspect we need to add on for this generation because as I said, what I really notice is that um what gets the attention encourages the behavior,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the adults are the ones who control what's getting attention. So I think when we start to change, like I remember like when I was younger, it was just the dudes that fought, hooped, womanized, and was like entertainers.
Mm-hmm.
That's like 100% of the attention. Anyone else fight, you was just there, yeah.
Yeah.
So you notice a lot of people that was on this side started doing that.
Even like I look, yeah, and you again, you see it in we got classroom experience, so you see it in the classroom all the time, and you be sitting there looking like
You know he ain't even like that.
yeah, exactly. Like, you ain't even like that, bro. Like
It's like they trying,
right,
You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, let me try something because I'm just sitting here and nobody not paying me no mind.
yeah. But you gotta have, but I think that's also important. Like you gotta have like those teachers in those buildings that recognize those things and have the rapport with the students to pull them up and be like, bro, let me holler at you, bro. Like, come on, you don't gotta, because you look ridiculous. Like you starting to look ridiculous, man.
Yeah, it don't fix you.
Yeah, that's not you. Even if people try to make it seem like it is you, that's really not you. They not laughing with you. They laughing at you. Because those that know better, they know that that's not you. And you're gonna have yourself out here like vulnerable in a situation that you shouldn't be in.
Many of the black children, especially from what they refer to as, I don't like this term, but I'm gonna say it still. They call it financially insecure neighborhoods. That's a political correct thing to say. Um, Fire, they're not successful because of their parents. They just have fire inside of them and they want to accomplish their goals. I think like nothing burn. I don't know why this is a pet peeve for me. Like parents taking credit for something they had no contribution to.
Mm.
Like many of the kids that I observed from growing up, even during teaching, especially teaching, and this could go into another argument, but there's something inside of them where, like, regardless of where you put that child, they're gonna do something with themselves, and regardless of what happens in life, they're gonna do something with themselves.
Yeah. I think it's definitely like some children out there, some people out there that like, they were gonna be successful regardless, like what their situation was. I don't know whether it's like something genetic or whether it's like
So I said it could go into a different argument.
Yeah.
But I want to get into that one.
or just what they've been exposed to or the way what they've been exposed to reacts with something genetic within them. I don't know. But yeah, you gotta like, you gotta respect it. Like I remember being in school myself as a youngin, and I had a lot of respect for the people that didn't have like my type of background because I came from like 2-parent household. Both of my parents college graduates. So for me, my dad was a teacher. So academics was just, it was just, I was immersed in it. Like we had, a library in the crib, bunch of books. I see, what I'm saying? Like, so the expectation was for me to do what I did, end up going to college, doing well in school, going to college. But I would think about people that didn't have that environment, that environmental foundation.
They're still doing their thing.
Yeah, and I'd be like, damn, like, why are you doing this? Like,
A lot of people like that doing their thing.
yeah, yeah. So I just always had like a lot of like, respect for them. Um, yeah, and I hope that don't come off as like paternalistic or anything, but it just, it seemed like they were, because again, like, because when you, as a parent, when you create an environment where something is normalized,
Right.
then as a child, all you got to do is just go with the flow. That's why and that goes for anything. So even if there's like negativity, underachievement, anti-intellectualism, when that's normalized, as a child, you just go with the flow. That's how you're gonna be. But if you provide something different, then it's like whatever's provided, whatever the environment dictates, is, to your point, it's going to take a strong person to deviate and go against like what the environment like dictates.
And the reason I brought it up is that we need to give more credit to the brothers and sisters out there, because they out there doing their thing, fire. Like, because some people come from a lot of craziness,
Yeah,
and somehow, some way, they manage to do very well for themselves, always have an income in, taking care of their family, and we need more praise for that, because, as my mother said, a lot of kids don't have any help.
yeah,
They really don't. Like, they don't have any help. They really have to like fend for themselves, even if they live with adults in the house. It's just they're there, but they don't really interact with them,
yeah,
and they have to make a decision in their mind. The ones that I saw, man, especially teaching, I could say majority of them, and I know that's probably due to the demographic I was in or location, but I could say majority of them really just want to do something with themselves, because their home situation was not where it was at.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of times the issue is like them learning how to navigate that school space. Because another thing you realize too, and this is like there are distinctions among students, right? Because even if you say like the so-called bad schools, right? Even in those so-called bad schools, there are a lot of resources available, but you got to know how to get it, right? And some of the more quote unquote good schools, even though you get the cultural violence, they're gonna still give you the daily dose of white supremacy. But those are the schools where you're gonna learn higher level math, you're gonna get exposure to more AP classes and whatnot. This again, the environment. So it's like all you kind of got to do is go with the flow. You're gonna get, you're gonna find out about the extracurricular programs. You're gonna find out about the internships. Um, the different teachers are gonna recommend the summer programs for you, and all that stuff is there. And then some of those other schools, the comprehensive schools or the neighborhood schools, you gotta know how to go get it. So it's kind of like just being in the hood. In the hood, it's got, if you need access, you need certain things. I need this or I need that. You gotta know who to call. You gotta know who to talk to. Like you gotta know who to go holler at. Like, okay, I gotta go around the corner, go holler at my man if I need this. But then if I need this, I might have to go down the block and talk to him. And you gotta first know how to think to figure that out. And you gotta know like who to talk to, when to talk to him, and you gotta be motivated. Like a lot of times in these schools, these comprehensive schools, the kids just like they're not. A lot of them are not as motivated, so they don't know how to really navigate that.
Is there any advice you could give parents to help them deal with the cultural violence their child may expose being in certain environments?
Yes,
First, define what you mean by cultural violence.
cultural violence. So, children being exposed to ideas that make them feel inferior. That's a violent act because there are different types of violence, right? There's physical violence. You punch somebody in the mouth. That's physical violence. There's there's emotional violence. There's all types of violence, right? When you cause harm, right? So if I'm a black child and I'm sitting in a classroom and people might think this is extreme, but if you celebrate George Washington, that's cultural violence because I know, and more of us should know that George Washington primarily, when you look at George Washington from an African-centered perspective, George Washington was a slaveholder,
Right.
first and foremost. These white folks can talk about him being the first president and Valley Forge and all that. He could be their hero. President's Day, you want to celebrate him and all that. Maybe buy a TV on sale from somewhere. Cool. But for me, he's a slaveholder first and foremost, right? So if I'm a black child and I'm sitting in a history class and we're not talking about that first and foremost, that's a form of violence because what you're trying to do, you're trying to play in my face because you want me to have a different perception of him as this hero. But then, like, how is he a hero? Like, he believed that my people, my ancestors, should have been enslaved, and he did enslave us. Wow, he was the president in the highest office in the nation, right? So, as parents, we first have to recognize that that's the reality, and we really want to. And again, it's almost like you want to, what is it? Not vaccinate, but you know, protect your children from that by giving them those lessons as early as possible. So by the time they go into the school, and whoever the teachers are, and based on whatever the curriculum is, and they try to play in your kid's face, your kids are already protected. They already know, okay, yeah, he about to tell me about this, but I already know better. You know what I'm saying? Like, all these guys, like the Thomas Jeffersons, you know what I'm saying? All these guys, slaveholders, first and foremost, or even like in a math class. In a math class, it's like, oh, every formula is named after some European to give you the impression that math didn't come about until Europeans developed it. But thousands of years prior, our ancestors in ancient Kemet, Nubia, wherever, were using mathematics. We couldn't have had great, thriving civilizations without mathematics because you can't build anything without mathematics. You can't maintain a society without
Highly
mathematics.
efficient mathematics too.
Exactly.
That still exists today.
You can't forecast anything. You can't plan for anything. You can't manage human beings without mathematics using some type of calculations. So, even that's a form of cultural violence because that's subtly right there. I'm in the math class because you don't gotta tell me that math is not for me. All you gotta do is show me that it's for somebody else. And then I'm intelligent, so unless I do any deeper research. In the absence of any deeper research, I'm gonna internalize that. Because if you show me the textbook and all I see is white folks in the textbook, then I'm naturally going to arrive at the conclusion that, oh, this is for white people. Like Lisa Delpit has that book, Multiplication is for White People, which comes from something a young brother down in New Orleans somewhere when she was observing his some elementary school classrooms. That's what he said. He was like, yo, like, we do addition and subtraction. That's easy. But the harder stuff, multiplication and division, that's for the white people. So that hierarchy is already embedded in a lot of our children. And we don't talk about this enough. But it is like I would argue that our level of mathematical proficiency coincides with our racial esteem. Because a lot of us, like, we feel inferior as black people generally. We don't talk about that, a lot of us.
Don't talk about it.
Right? We just kind of find ways to, assuage our egos and, do this and do that. And we try to, what did Fonte from Little Brother say? Like, we don't want to win. We just want to look good while we losing. So we end up doing a whole lot of that. Right? And we don't address the core issue. Right? So even a lot of the things that we don't aspire to, or we don't try to do, or we don't sign up for, is because we don't believe, we fundamentally have been programmed and conditioned to believe that we can't do that stuff. And we got to start to ask those questions like, well, why is it that I don't believe I could do this? Because when you get to the bottom of that, like, it's like Malcolm X said, he said, and look at you. Who told you to hate yourself? It's the same thing.
And I had a question, and I hope I say this properly. A brother was telling me about the system, right? But it was an inaccurate assessment of the system. And what the real issue was that you don't believe you can do stuff because the things we were talking about can be done within the system. So it goes back to what you're saying is that, like, this deep seated inadequacy we have about ourselves and this confidence issue after being bombarded with so many, it's kind of rough fight when you think about it. From you born, especially as a black man, right? You're bombarded 24/7 every day for decades that you're nothing and you're not capable of anything.
So it's like,
you got your own brother telling you that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the system.
So it's like, how do you fight against that?
So it's just like, it's kind of like you really got to dig down deep, and we need a better support system for brothers, letting brothers know they can. That's why jealousy is so rough for me to process with a brother. Like, you can't afford to be jealous of another brother, bro. You can't. You can't. And we have a very big, we're programmed to be jealous of other brothers.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't control the environment, and those that do control the environment will allow. We've learned that only minimal spaces will be allowed.
Facts.
So instead of us stepping out of that and saying like,
I create my own space,
yeah, like,
or we could create a space together.
and why should we allow those people to dictate how we move and who gets allowed, who gets access, right? But if you buy into that, then it's like, okay, it makes sense
It's a limitation.
that I
So
got to
it's a
fight
limit.
with. I got to fight with you because if these folks, if Mr. Charlie and Miss Ann, they only got 20 slots, and it's 200 of us. In order for me to be in that 20, 180 of y'all got to go. So, and a lot of people are so caught up in just following that program instead of stepping back and saying, well, wait, we we could create some type of infrastructure where not only the all 200 of us that's here could be provided for, but maybe 2,000 of us. But that's like, that's the hard work. But again, all roads lead back to math because math is about not only the act of problem solving, it's also about how to identify a problem properly. So we have to identify the situation and assess the situation properly. Instead of saying, well, my problem is how can I be one of those 20 that gets the slot that's being allowed? How do we work together, figure out how to work together to create a situation where not only all 200 of us can get access to what we need, but 2,000 of us can get access to what we need. And like, but just being able to identify that, being able to see that, like, because it's like like looking at a math problem on a piece of paper. It's like sometimes you got to like size it up and figure out like, okay, well, how am I going to approach this? Should I go this way? Should I go that way? What's the formula I need to use? Or maybe I'm looking at this all wrong. Maybe I need to rewrite it. Move this expression to the other side of the equal sign. Move that expression to the other side of the equal sign. Like it's a lot of different things. And it with the mathematics, it trains our brain in terms of like how to approach problems and how to recognize them. Like I said, how to recognize them and then how to think about how to solve them. Beyond being a math teacher, beyond being a math professor, creating resources for our community, such as the YouTube channel and the books that I've written. We just need to have like positive. We need to black people. When I say we, I mean black people. We need to have more positive conversations around subjects like mathematics. Black people need to be sitting around talking about chemistry, physics, like all these things that are like seen as, if you're a black person involved in that, you're seen as like this unicorn, like this special kind of weird like outlier in the statistical data, right? Well, we need to sit around and talk about these things, and it's a lot of us that have positive experiences in math because often we have the negative conversations, like all the podcasts. Somebody brings up math. Oh, I was never good at math. Or I didn't think it was pointless. Or we have those conversations.
Or math is not for me, or math is not for my child, or
Right.
my child's not a math person.
And those are very uninformed conversations, right? And it's like people just regurgitating that same kind of idea, which is very limiting. So we need to have like more positive conversations around math and like, and then figure out, how we can like normalize it. Cause it's not difficult. The thing that holds us back is this belief that we can't do it.
Idea.
The idea is that's it. So we lose at inception. Like, so children walk into a classroom, they already expect, oh, this is gonna be too hard. But like with a lot of things, like things can be difficult when you're first being introduced to them. But for some reason, mathematics is one of the only areas where when it becomes difficult, we just give up. Other things in life, like kids get brand new video games. Video games hard at first. They play it till they get good because they believe that they're gonna get good at it.
That repetition,
Yeah.
That repetition.
Repetition, was it repetition, duration, and frequency? Yeah, I learned that from Marcus Klein out at Freedom Home Academy out in Chicago.
Yeah.
That's his educational philosophy. Repetition, duration, and frequency. And then now, but see, the game is all messed up because you got people talking about like, don't give homework. We don't give homework. Like, how you gonna practice?
Facts.
How you gonna practice? You don't get homework. And then they try to kick it on again. They see they keep playing in our face. They try to kick it on some like, oh, we want to reduce the stress level for the kids and this and that. It's like, bro, like life is stress. So now we get, because if you say you want to reduce stress, now I want to have a different conversation. Now I want to know, okay, well, how do you decide what activities you're going to limit? Because a lot of activities can cause stress.
Facts. And they're gonna
right?
have more stress when they go on later in life when they don't know how to do nothing.
Exactly.
But one thing I want to add, you have other schools in different areas that get a lot of homework.
Because they trying to win. And they know that that's how you win. They try to tell us, they try to be like, look at this article that got written in like, 1995 about, how homework doesn't help. I'm like, all right, let's really read this article. Because I don't think y'all really read that article. You talk about this like research that's been done. Like, let's really read that article. And when you really read those articles, you realize that it does not actually say what they're claiming that it says, right? When you really read it, you know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, like they trying to win, and they know that like you can't win, you can't excel in any subject without practice, without putting time in, without putting the effort in. Just like with sports, like you got to practice, especially with like math. Like math, you got to practice. You got to really people are deficient in math because people don't do math. If you do it, like you know what I'm saying, like do it, you'll become proficient at it. But you got to do it. It's got to be taught to you, and you got to then practice.
You gotta get your reps in.
Gotta get your reps in. That's it. You gotta get your reps in, and parents got to do that too. So we can't just parents can't just be like, all right, well, I did my time. I already went to school. Like you on your own. You gotta do your homework on your own or whatever. Nah, sit down at that table with your child. It's a bonding activity. And what it does is, and I want parents to take this away, like take this away from the conversation too, like sitting down at that dining room table, kitchen table, even on the couch or wherever, like with your child and like doing that work with them. What you're doing is something that's priceless because you're instilling value in that activity. That's what you're doing, and your child gonna be like, yo, like, wow, my mom even doing this, my dad even doing this, grandmom, grandpa, my uncle. Wow, okay, all right. And they trying to learn. It's not like they already know it. And your child gonna look at you like, damn, like you like 40 years old, 50 years old. You trying to learn this like me? I'm 14 or I'm 12. Like, what I mean? It must be important. If you really out here trying to learn this, you know, and that's and again, and then once you, as the parent, and I would say this too, as an adult, a lot of the things that, because a lot of us, we reference our experience when we was in sixth grade. Our brains wasn't even fully developed when we was in sixth grade. That, I believe that's part of the reason why the math was difficult. There's a lot of other reasons too, poor instructional practices, maybe an inconducive learning environment. But as an adult, when you go back and look at that, it's gonna make more sense. Plus, you've lived life, so now things are gonna make sense, make more sense now than they did when you was 10 or 11. You 40 now, so it's not. So don't sit there and think like, well, damn, I'm 40 now, but when I was 10, it was hard. So as a 40-year-old, it's probably gonna be just as hard. It's not. I promise you, it's not. It's not gonna be that. But then when you do become proficient as a parent or as an adult, just imagine like how your youngest gonna feel, like your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, when they sit in class and let's say they don't understand a new topic that the teacher introduces. Imagine they sit there and they like, it's cool. My mom can help me when I get home. My dad can when I get home. Like that's priceless. Like most children don't have that. They don't got access to that, right? So imagine just like, our children come to us for a lot of things, and our children know that we are resources for certain things. Imagine you being a resource for your children with their math homework, their algebra, their geometry, like I got an ambitious goal that in our community, parents will be able to help their children with any math class they take in as long as their child is living under their roof. But this is one of the reasons why I maintain a YouTube channel, because I want parents to be able to go get that understanding. So go watch the videos, lock in, watch the videos. And then so if your child is in 12th grade taking calculus, I want you to be able to help your child with calculus. Because a lot of us as parents, we have this like homework help ceiling. That's what I call it. Where it's like, some people, they check out at 5th grade. Yeah. At the 5th grade, I can't help you no more. Some parents check out at 6th grade, 7th grade. You know what? Some parents after algebra 1, I can't help you. Some parents, as soon as that child gets into algebra 1, I can't help you. I want that to change, right? But I can't just, browbeat parents and say like, y'all need to be doing this, y'all need to be doing that. They got to have resources. So again, that's why I keep plugging the YouTube channel, because I want everybody to go to the All This Math YouTube channel and like really learn. Like you can really learn the math so that you can be a resource for your children, because we can't rely on the schools. We can't. Like we've seen what that has brought us. We can't. The school should be a space for practice, just like recess, right? The young brothers, they love recess because why? They get to practice their basketball skills, their football skills. They didn't learn those skills at school, though. They learned them at home and around the way. They come to school to practice. So math should be the same way. But the community has to be able to be the primary educator, though, for the trigonometry. The old heads on the block need to be able to teach trigonometry to the young brothers and the young sisters. That's the type of community we got to have. We got to have that. And like I said, it's an ambitious goal, but it's necessary. I don't see any other way, for things to really improve for us as a collective.